More often than not, it feels like Zangief gets the short end of the stick, but luckily that's not always the case. For example, in Ultra Street Fighter 4, Zangief was a genuinely great character with quite a lot going for him. Obviously, if he's in a position like this, he's not doing so hot, but that's perfectly fine. It would be fucked up if he was. No matter what game he's in, Zangief's game plan is usually something like get in and stay in, and it just so happens that in Ultra, he's quite good at doing that. He has a good mid-range presence because he's got some fantastic buttons. Far Medium Punch, for example, is a 4-frame medium with huge range that is plus on hit and block. He also has a number of great anti-projectile options, such as his Lariat, Focus, and of course, Green Hand. There's also EX Green Hand, which is one of the most terrifying moves in the entire game. This move really has it all. It has strike invincibility on frame 1. It's an amazing combo ender, it's amazing for buffers, it's a great anti-projectile tool, and if you're brave enough, it's even a good reversal because the strike invulnerability lasts up until it hits. Really good fucking move, really good. However, on top of being relatively easy to land, this move is also very rewarding to land. See, the meterless Green Hands are famously minus on hit, but EX Green Hand, on top of leaving you very close to the opponent, is +1 on hit, which is exactly what Zangief wants. However, Ultra Gief isn't just relatively good at getting in, he's also quite good at staying in. His sweep, down forward heavy kick, and every single one of his command grabs is a hard knockdown in Ultra, meaning that he almost always has time to get back in and make you guess all over again. This is especially important for Atomic Buster. If this move wasn't a hard knockdown, you would literally just corner yourself and look like an idiot. But because it is, you put your opponent in a fucking horrific scenario where they have to guess between an overhead, empty jump low, empty jump SPD, empty jump catch backdash, and again, everything I just mentioned leads into another guessing game. It's fucking just unreal. And even if something does go wrong, Gief's defensive options are surprisingly decent. It's not a particularly good one, but his backdash is still invincible. And his EX Green Hand and EX SPD both have frame 1 strike invincibility. So, how about we ruin all of that? Just to give a little rundown for people who might not be super familiar with it, Ultra Street Fighter 4 and as a result Omega Street Fighter 4 were not made by the same team who did every other version of Street Fighter 4. They were made by the team who would go on to make Street Fighter 5, and you can really see it in a lot of places. While Ultra was like their genuine attempt at updating Street Fighter 4, Omega was more like a personal testing ground for stuff that would later appear in Street Fighter 5, or to just throw stuff at the wall and see what stuck. A lot of ideas that originated in Omega Mode would go on to appear in Street Fighter 5 in some way, shape or form. For example, in Omega Mode, Ryu has a parry, kinda like his V-Skill 1 in Street Fighter 5, and it's also got an optional follow-up which is kinda similar to his V-Trigger 2. There are hints of Street Fighter 5 everywhere in Omega Mode, it's honestly really cool. Although of course, not everything made it over. On the whole, Omega is a bit crazier than Street Fighter 5, there's a lot of really nutty stuff in here. Now, I don't think every new idea in Omega Mode lands, there's a few characters who feel downright bizarre. Like, I really do think they fucked up Hugo. I can't stand what they did with him. But on the whole, Omega Mode is really, really fun, and there's a lot of cool shit in here. It gave us the Electric Wind Dan Fist, which is pretty funny, and like, it also gave us the first time in human history that anyone at Capcom actually gave a shit about T-Hawk, which is always nice to see. I'll get to Gief in a second, but before that I just want to touch on some of the universal changes that were made in Omega Mode. Unlike Ultra Street Fighter 4, which has none, Omega Mode has 3 frames of input buffer, just like Street Fighter 5. This makes combos very easy and very accessible, which is quite nice. Omega was built off Arcade Edition 2012 rather than Ultra, so none of the new system mechanics in Ultra are present, so there's no Ultra combo double. For Gief, this really doesn't matter. It was really bad on him in Ultra. However, while the loss of Ultra combo double doesn't matter, the loss of red focus does. A lot of characters don't really care about red focus, but Gief is not one of them. EX Green Hand into red focus, despite costing 4 bars, is one of the best uses of red focus in the entire game. It's absurdly rewarding for how easy it is to land. I've already talked about why this position is so good for Gief, so being able to get it from mid-screen off one of your best moves, while also doing about 400 damage is very fucked up, even if it does cost 4 bars. Mobility in Omega is generally buffed. Characters tend to walk faster and have faster dashes, and if they don't, there's usually some other part of their kit that improves their mobility. Not only does Ryu's dash go further in Omega, but it's 4 frames faster, going from 18 frames to 14. Which is absurdly fast. Unfortunately, Zangief wasn't invited to this big mobility party that Omega has going on. There are only 3 characters in Omega mode who have a forward dash that is 20 frames or slower. Dhalsim at 21, Hugo at 25, and unfortunately, Zangief at 26, just as slow as it is in Ultra. It's a very slight increase, but his forward dash does go a tiny bit further than it does in Ultra. Not a massive deal, but it's something. Unfortunately, while his dashes go a little bit further than Ultra, his forward walk speed was decreased. This is an incredibly fucked up and mean change to make to a character like Gief. Having such a slow forward dash also makes Zangief one of only 2 characters in Omega mode to be minus on block after level 2 focus into forward dash. Hugo is minus 3 doing the same thing, and Dhalsim is 0. To be fair, Ultra Gief has this exact same issue, but it's just not as big of a problem for him because he's less starved for ways to get in, and he's just better at keeping pressure going. Omega Gief needs all the help he can get, so not having something like this is a shame. So moving on to this character's kit, rather than just going from like normals to specials to supers, that kind of thing, I want to talk about this in 3 specific parts. I want to talk about his good traits all at once and his bad traits all at once, but before we get to any of that, I want to talk about the weird shit. This character has some absolutely bizarre tools and changes that I really don't know how to feel about, so I figured let's just get the weird stuff out of the way. First of all, when he does his running grab, he now runs faster. Here's Ultra Gief. And here's Omega Gief. Look at he go. This honestly feels more like a cruel joke than anything else. Like, yeah, they buffed everyone else's mobility and they nerfed Zangief's, but don't worry about it, look, he runs faster. Hell yeah. Omega Zangief has one new normal, forward heavy punch. It's a jumping headbutt that's kind of like a faster but less useful version of his forward medium kick in Street Fighter V. It doesn't have much recovery and it can jump over low attacks, but unfortunately it whiffs on crouch. Not only does it whiff on crouch, but it's not that great if they stand up either. It's always minus on block, and the best I got it to be on hit was 0. Weirdly enough, I think the best use of this move might actually be in juggles. It has limited juggle potential, and on top of doing 100 damage, it actually does 300 stun. Close heavy kick is now a launcher for Gief in Omega, and this 2-hit combo not only does nearly 300 damage, but 550 stun, which is pretty fucking scary. You can squeeze out a tiny bit more damage with the EX Green Hand, but you only get 1 hit, so it's not that impressive. Now this might look scary, but honestly I'm not so sure. Close heavy kick is unsafe on block, and even if you land a close heavy kick, you need to be point blank for a lot of the cast. It's quite lenient on Gief, but that makes sense. He's got a big boy hurt box after all. I had a lot of trouble getting this to work on Ryu, and there's some characters that I just couldn't get it to work on at all. Far Heavy Punch has some bizarre new properties. The normal version does 20 more damage, but is 2 frames slower. However, if you hold the button down, you can now charge the attack. The fully charged version comes out on frame 26, does 40 more damage and 50 extra stun. It's kind of reminiscent of what he has in Street Fighter V, but unfortunately it's missing a lot of the utility. In Street Fighter V, Zangief's heavy punch is 1 frame faster than it is in Omega if you don't charge it. But if you do charge it, it's a whole 11 frames slower, at frame 37. Despite that, the move has a lot more going for it. First of all, you're nowhere near as vulnerable as you could be while charging, because you get 1 frame of upper body armor from frames 3 to 34. Another big thing this move has going for it is safety. The uncharged version is -4 on block, which isn't that bad, but the fully charged version is actually plus on block. From a distance, it's +2, and up close, it's +3. While the move itself does less damage than it does in Omega, there are more good ways to get damage off it. For example, both the uncharged and fully charged versions are crush counters. And with V-Trigger, the uncharged version becomes a good combo starter, and the fully charged version becomes a good combo ender. In Omega, all that utility is gone. It's always unsafe on block, has no armor, but instead, it's an armor breaker. This is just kind of silly, really. You can't use it to break armor on reaction, because even though it's faster than Street Fighter V, it's still frame 26, that's relatively slow. You're just kinda throwing it out and hoping it works, and if it doesn't, you're probably fucked, because it's unsafe on block. No Oki either, there's also that. Close heavy punch is another normal that got some strange changes. In Ultra, this normal's just a little bit odd. Like, it's quite fast at frame 7 and the damage and stun are good, but it's not cancelable and it's unsafe on block and minus on hit. To be fair though, it is only -1, which on a character with a frame 2 SPD, you know, that's workable. In Omega, it seems like the same kind of story. It's still unsafe on block, still minus on hit, but it does 40 more damage and 50 extra stun at the cost of being nearly twice as slow, frame 13 instead of 7. The interesting change though is the fact that on counter hit, it now causes a crumple state. It's kinda like a prototype crush counter really. If you land this, it's really rewarding in terms of damage and stun. If you spend a bar, you can easily break 500 damage. And if forward heavy punch decides to work, you can easily break 800 stun. The issue here is, again, the practicality. Yes, this move is massively rewarding on counter hit, but it's an unsafe on block proximity normal in a game without guaranteed counter hits on stuff like blocked DPs. You can't space it to be safe either, because again, it's a proximity normal. Even from just this far out, I get far heavy punch. Again, this is one of those tools where if you're going for it, you're just kinda hoping that it works, and if it doesn't, you get fucked up. Next up, I want to talk about Green Hand, because it received several bizarre changes in Omega mode. But before we get into any of those, we need to touch on some universal stuff. Ultra Street Fighter 4 introduced the ability to do crouching shoryukens. Which, if you're not familiar with them, is just a shoryuken performed by hitting down forward twice rather than requiring you to go forward, down, down forward. It's just a quality of life thing. The main advantage is that it just makes cancelling crouching normals into moves that require a DP motion much easier, because you don't have to hit forward. Because Omega mode was built off Arcade Edition 2012 rather than Ultra, Omega characters don't have this luxury. Except when they do, because Omega Gief does. This is typically not the case in Omega. If I try the same thing with Ryu, you won't see any Shoryuken. It's not just Omega Gief either. Omega Rufus can do crouching Shoryukens too. But it is just kind of bizarre. Like, this is just a quality of life feature, but you're only giving quality to the life of, like, a handful of characters. It's just bizarre. Moving on to the direct changes made to Green Hand, we need to take a little look at Ultra Green Hand for a minute. While they leave the opponent standing on regular hit, on counter hit, all 4 versions of Green Hand knock the opponent down. The opponent gets launched for long enough and close enough that you always get Oki after a dash. This is pretty cool for the meterless Green Hands, which are usually all minus on hit. One thing that is worth mentioning about Green Hand being minus on hit though, is that in Ultra, Light Green Hand is only minus 2 on hit. And considering that you're a character with a frame 2 command grab and 2 moves that are strike invincible on frame 1, I don't know, that's kinda workable. You could maybe get a bit silly with it, you know, cheeky little command grab. Unfortunately, in Omega, it feels closer to minus 6 or 7 on hit, like medium or heavy Green Hand. Unfortunately, this is much too minus to get silly with at all. Anyways, as I just showed, in Omega, when you combo into a meterless Green Hand, it behaves as you would expect. Minus on hit leaves the opponent standing. Unlike Ultra, where they only knock down on counter hit, in Omega, any raw Green Hand will knock the opponent down. Unfortunately, the knockdown isn't as good as it is in Ultra. After a dash, you are at best 0. Instead of only knocking down on counter hit, you instead get a better knockdown on counter hit. For the meterless Green Hand, I think this is overall alright. Like, it means that you're at least not minus after landing a raw one, even if you don't get Oki, so it's alright. In the corner, you can actually juggle after counter hit light, medium, or heavy Green Hand. You can only go into close medium punch, which got juggle potential in Omega, and while the damage is good, you wonder how much this would realistically happen. EX Green Hand on the other Green Hand is a fucking disaster. No matter how you go into it, it always knocks down. It's not a good knockdown either. Not only are you not always point blank, but you are at best minus 1 after a dash. The only way to get any kind of plus frames off EX Green Hand is to get a counter hit with it. In this situation, you are plus 1 after a dash, but man, how the mighty have fallen. It also has less range than it does in Ultra. In Ultra, EX Green Hand has a little bit more range than Heavy Green Hand. In Omega, pretty sad. But to make up for losing so much of what made it such a good move, it does 20 more damage. We'll touch on it later, but yeah, this is a bit of a theme with this character. Here's another pretty odd change. In Omega, Green Hand actually cancels into SPD. However, it only works on block, or if Green Hand connects with the opponent while they have armor. On block, all this does is make Green Hand even more unsafe than it already was. Now this is totally fine. Grabbing people out of block stun usually just isn't a thing in Street Fighter, that's perfectly normal. Instead, this seems to have been met with beating focus in mind. Against other Omega characters, this is a perfectly fine tool for beating focus, but funnily enough, against Ultra characters, they can just backdash after the Green Hand, which is pretty funny. Realistically, I don't think this matters much, like you're generally going to be playing Ultra versus Ultra or Omega versus Omega, but I don't know, it's kinda interesting nonetheless. One last thing to note about Green Hand. In Ultra, light, medium, and heavy Green Hand always do 120, 130, and 140 damage respectively. In Omega, all 3 versions do 130. Unless they hit an airborne opponent, in which case they only do 80. This was probably done to encourage you to juggle into EX Green Hand, which, as long as you get both hits, always does 160. Moving on to this character's good traits, I think it makes sense to talk about the parry first. The input is forward heavy punch and heavy kick, and it's active on frame 1. It does have a lot of recovery on whiff, but unlike what you might be used to in something like Street Fighter V, you're not counter hit punishable. Ryu and Hugo also got a parry with the same input in Omega, but unlike them, Zangief doesn't have an optional follow-up that he can do. You can cancel a successful parry into another one though for multi-hit attacks. Just like Ryu and Hugo, however, the parry will lose to attacks that break armor. Still, this is an undeniably amazing tool to have. It's a great defensive option, and it's nice for playing around fireballs. It's better than focus for that purpose anyways. You don't take any grade damage, and you don't have to commit to a dash afterwards. I think it's pretty safe to say that the most obvious good trait this character possesses is damage. Omega Zangief's damage potential is genuinely ludicrous. With a deep jump in, he can easily break 400 damage. It can go higher than what I just did too. With the exception of crouch light kick, crouch heavy kick, and far heavy kick, every single one of this character's grounded normals does more damage than it does in Ultra. And the only one that does less damage is far heavy kick, going from 140 to 120. And to be fair, there's a good reason for that. We're not just talking about like little 10 damage increases either, it's typically like 20 or 30, and close light kick, close heavy kick, and crouching medium punch all do 40 more damage than they do in Ultra. His forward and back throw also do 40 more damage, as well as 20 more stun. It's not just his normals that do more damage too. His light and medium SPD do 50 more damage than Ultra, and his heavy SPD does 20 more. Although unfortunately, they're way worse than they are in Ultra, and we'll touch on that later. Also, light SPD has a tiny bit more range, while heavy has a tiny bit less. Surprisingly, both of his Ultras also do 30 more damage. This is surprising because, on the whole, Ultras were nerfed in Omega. A lot of staple setups are either gone, or lead into a non-cinematic, weaker version of that Ultra. They're typically much harder to combo into. To be fair though, Gief in Ultra also generally couldn't combo into his Ultras, so it's fine. The next move I want to talk about is a great example of this character's damage output, but it also ties into something else that's good about this character I want to touch on. This is EXSPD. On its own, it does 350 damage and 300 stun, but that's the thing. It doesn't necessarily have to hit on its own like most command grabs, because if you cancel into it, it becomes a hit that you can combo into at the cost of 50 damage and 50 stun. On top of being able to combo into it, you're also technically able to combo out of it. The opponent is left in a state where they can be hit OTG after this lands, but you're only close enough to get anything here if you land an EXSPD while cornered. It doesn't matter how you go into EXSPD here, you can combo into it or you can land it raw. You still get the OTG sweep. Unfortunately, while the new stuff with this move is really good, it did lose invincibility. What's nice about EXSPD outside of the damage and stun is that it's just another good combo option for Gief. Ultra Gief has perfectly adequate combos, but they're a little bit limited, I guess. A lot of the time with Ultra Gief, you just go into EX Green Hand. And like, EX Green Hand is an amazing move, so that's perfectly fine, but, you know, you'd like a little bit more variety. On top of the 3-frame input buffer making his links easier, changes to his frame data in Omega have given him several new links. As an example, Close medium kick is +5 on hit in Ultra, while here it's +7. Sweep has been sped up from frame 9 to frame 6, so you can link into it. In fairness, not all of his frame data has improved. As an example, in Ultra his far medium punch was frame 4 and +5 on hit, while now it's frame 5 and is only +5 on hit if it hits a crouching opponent. And it's technically not frame 5 here because it's hitting late. One of the most notable improvements to his combo game is crouch medium punch. In Ultra, this move is frame 8, does 80 damage and isn't cancelable, while here, it's frame 6, does 120 damage and is cancelable. It also forces stand on hit, which is important for some combos. It's a little finicky, but you can link into it after a close medium kick, and this is where some of your highest damage is going to come from. And of course, it's not just new links that he got when it comes to starting combos. I've already shown his close heavy kick launcher several times in this video. And of course, it's not just close heavy kick. I mentioned earlier that far heavy kick lost 20 damage, and there's a good reason for that. Now, if it hits an airborne opponent, you can juggle after. Your options are a little bit more limited than they are with close heavy kick, but that's fair enough. This is an amazing tool for catching jumps or backdashes, and now it just feels a little bit more rewarding. And on top of all these new tools that Gief has to start combos, he's got new combo enders too. Quarter circle forward and light kick gives you a new special move called Russian Stomping, and in terms of damage, this is your strongest meterless combo ender. The light version has the shortest range but does 150 damage and combos after your light normals. While the heavy version has the longest range, does 180 damage, and combos after close medium punch and crouching medium punch. The medium version seems completely useless. Too slow to combo after light normals, but doesn't do anything better than heavy. EX Stomp is the best of both worlds. It has the speed of the light version, the range of the heavy version, and more damage than both at 210. You also probably noticed that unlike the meterless versions, it knocks down. Saying it gives you Oki is a bit of a stretch, but unfortunately this is one of your better knockdowns. In Ultra, both punch and kick lariat are frame 4, but here the kick lariat has been slowed down, but to compensate, it hits further away from Gief faster. Still, the range isn't all that amazing. To be honest, I don't think this really does anything. Light kick stomp has similar range, the same damage, but doesn't whiff on crouch. And while you do have a 4-stand cancelable normal, if you land a crouch medium punch, I think you'd rather just go into heavy stomp. It does 30 more damage, and while that doesn't knock down and this does, I mean, look at this. That's not really a workable knockdown at all. Before we get onto the bad stuff, we need to talk about Omega Gief's super. Just like his ultras, it does 30 more damage. However, in a similar vein to EXSPD, you can combo into it like a hit, but unlike that, there's no loss in damage whatsoever if you do. The last hit of stomps is super cancelable, so this gives you a really good 4-bar conversion. Even off a relatively weak combo, the damage is obscene. If you get something like a deep heavy jump in with 4 bars, you easily break 700 damage. And if you factor in stupid shit that you'll never land in an actual match, you can even break 800. However, as fun as it is to see numbers go up and health bars go down, I think it's time we finally talked about the things holding this character back, because, yeah, he is actually pretty fucking bad. See, the thing with Omega Gief is that there's actually not that much bad stuff to talk about, it's just that the bad stuff that there is really, really fucking bad. First of all, his mobility is garbage. but you already knew that. We've touched on that. It's arguably a little bit worse than it is in Ultra, but this is Omega, where pretty much everyone else got their mobility buffed, so yikes. However, the other issue with Gief kind of just stems from how Omega is different from Ultra as a whole. See, one thing I didn't mention about Omega is that, unlike Ultra, the game has almost no hard knockdowns. And as you've probably already realized, that's a pretty big fucking problem for Gief. In Ultra, both of Gief's sweeps and all of his command grabs are hard knockdowns, but here that's just not the case. In fact, he has no hard knockdowns. What this means is that Omega Gief has no kind of vortex or momentum whatsoever. When he does eventually work his way in, and does eventually guess right, he does more damage than Ultra Gief. There's no way around that. But unlike Ultra Gief, who, while the opponent is still knocked down, can get back in and make the opponent guess all over again, Omega Gief is stuck back at square one. He has to work his way in again, and then make the opponent guess again. And of course, none of that is guaranteed. Remember how I mentioned that Atomic Buster being a hard knockdown in Ultra was really important because it let you get another mix-up rather than just cornering yourself? No, yeah, in Omega you actually do just corner yourself. But hey, don't worry about it. It does 20 more damage than it does in Ultra. Hey! I do appreciate Omega Gief having a greater variety of combo enders, because that's fun. But it's kind of undermined by the fact that none of them at all give you what you want. Stomp just leaves the opponent standing and far away. Lariat gives you the shittiest knockdown I've ever seen in my life. And even EX Green Hand, one of your best moves in Ultra, now only gives anything close to advantage if it hits as a raw counter hit. And even then, it's not a great knockdown. Even Omega Gief's better knockdowns are pretty rough. EX SPD has a way better knockdown than the other SPDs, but even then it's not great. You're minus after a dash, you just get a little bit of time to walk in. And after EX stomps, you are plus after a dash. But you're not that close to the opponent, and I've tried it, you're very minus after a whiffed Green Hand. And again, I cannot stress just how bad the changes to EX Green Hand are. If this was Ultra, that would have hit, I would have been +1 up in my opponent's face, I would have done a nasty ass mix-up, after the mix-up I would have whiffed Green Hand, I would have been up in their face, and plus again. I feel like Omega Zangief is like what a 5-year-old seeing Zangief for the first time would assume he is. Like, big, slow, strong boy who is very strong and very slow. That's kind of all he is. Like, yeah, it's funny when he does a jump in and gets 400 damage needlessly or 500 for a bar, but honestly, it kind of doesn't matter. I think it's safe to say that, on average, Omega Zangief's damage per interaction is higher than Ultra Zangief's. I think that's pretty cut and dry. But yeah, it basically doesn't matter, because after every interaction that Ultra Gief has, chances are, he has a chance to make it happen again. It doesn't matter if you can do 500 damage off one interaction, if it's so difficult for you to do it even once per round. So that's basically Omega Zangief. He's a bit of a weird gimmicky character with a lot of weird gimmicky tools, who has to work really hard to get in, and when he eventually does, he's rewarded with high damage and having to do it all over again. He's an interesting character, and I can definitely see some people enjoying him just for how he is, but personally I think he's a bit of a mess, although there are some things I really like about him. I think his new combo routes are very fun. I think that's interesting. Especially the Stomp. I wish the Stomp was in Street Fighter V, that would have been fucking cool.